Late 1969, Los Angeles. A private party after a television show, the kind where no one is performing anymore. The lights are low, glasses are half full. Laughter comes easier than honesty. Someone laughs too loud. Someone says something they've said before, just never in front of the wrong people. Let's be honest, Elvis is just a poor Southern boy who got lucky. You can hear the dirt in his voice. The room doesn't freeze, it hesitates. A few smiles linger. A few heads turn away. This is how insults survive, disguised as jokes. Elvis doesn't look up. He doesn't defend himself. He turns the glass slowly between his fingers, as if deciding whether silence is still enough. Then a chair moves. Not violently, not for attention. Just enough to change the room. Johnny Cash stands. No anger, no grin, only a voice worn down by truth. "You have no idea," he says quietly, "what you just insulted." And in that moment, the story doesn't begin. It becomes unavoidable. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. By the end of the 1950s, Elvis Presley no longer belonged to any single place. His voice played in diners in Ohio, on jukeboxes in Nevada, through open car windows on the Pacific Coast Highway. His face was everywhere. And yet, in Los Angeles, he was still treated as if he'd arrived by mistake. Hollywood didn't mock him openly. It was subtler than that. A raised eyebrow when he spoke too fast. A smile held half a second too long after he said, "Y'all." Journalists leaned forward during interviews, nodding politely, then later asked editors to clean up the phrasing. Producers didn't tell him to change who he was. They framed it as advice. You'll come across smarter if you soften the accent. The audience out here likes clarity. Let's aim for something more neutral. Behind closed doors, the word hillbilly floated easily. Not shouted, never written down. Said with a laugh, like a shared understanding, as if it explained everything that made Elvis difficult to categorize. The way he moved, the way he sang, the way silence sometimes stretched around him before he answered a question. He heard all of it. That was the part people misunderstood. Elvis was not naive, and he wasn't insulated by fame. He caught the glances, the pauses, the small jokes disguised as compliments. He understood exactly what was being implied, that his roots were something to outgrow, not carry forward. Publicly, he adjusted. His interviews became smoother, slower. He chose his words carefully, rounding the edges of his speech until it fit better on West Coast television. It wasn't surrender. It was control. A way of keeping the focus where he wanted it, on the work. Privately, nothing changed. With musicians from Memphis, with Southern players who knew the weight of heat and dust and long roads, his voice dropped back into its natural rhythm. The accent returned without effort. So did the stories. Two versions of Elvis existed side by side, and neither was an act. One afternoon, after a radio interview, the host laughed and said lightly, "You've come a long way from Tupelo, haven't you?" Elvis smiled, thanked him, and walked out without comment. In the hallway, a tall man dressed in black watched him pass. Johnny Cash didn't stop him, didn't ask a question. He only noticed the way Elvis's shoulders tightened for a moment before settling again, like someone swallowing something sharp. Cash said nothing, but he understood the sound of it. Because to some people, an accent was a flaw to be polished away, and to others, it was proof you'd survived where you came from. Johnny Cash never learned how to hide where he came from, not because he couldn't, but because no one had ever asked him to. Arkansas shaped him early, before music, before stages, before the weight of being recognized. It was dust in summer, mud in winter, and a kind of poverty that didn't announce itself loudly. It just stayed. People spoke the way their parents had spoken, and no one apologized for it. An accent wasn't a mark against you. It was a record of where you'd stood, who you'd listened to, what you'd endured without asking for sympathy. Cash carried that with him into every room he entered, even as his name grew larger. He understood show business well enough to play along, but there were lines he never redrew for comfort. His voice stayed rough. His words stayed plain. If that limited him, so be it. He didn't idolize Elvis Presley. That part mattered. To Cash, Elvis was talented, driven, sometimes too careful. There were moments when he wished Elvis would speak sooner, push back harder, refuse to smooth himself into something safer. Silence, to Cash, often looked like permission. But respect didn't require agreement. He noticed the way people spoke to Elvis when they thought no one important was listening. The tone that slipped out backstage. The jokes that landed only because the room was full of the right kind of people. It wasn't cruelty. It was worse. It was comfort in superiority. One evening in a dressing room thick with smoke and exhaustion, another performer, East Coast, polished, celebrated, leaned back and made a comment about Elvis. Not malicious, almost affectionate. A remark about how Hollywood had done him a favor, how it had cleaned him up. A laugh followed. A couple of heads nodded. Cash watched Elvis's name hang in the air, unprotected. Later, when the room had emptied, Elvis found Cash first. Not angry, not embarrassed. Calm, measured. He spoke the way he always did when something mattered. "Don't step in," he said. Cash frowned, already disagreeing. "If I answer every insult," Elvis continued, "I'll become smaller than them." The logic was sound. That was the problem. Cash nodded slowly, the way a man does when he's heard the words, but not accepted them. He understood restraint. He even admired it. But where Elvis saw dignity in silence, Cash saw a debt being quietly accumulated. He agreed not to interfere. Out loud. Inside, he made a different decision. If another line was crossed, not on a stage, not for show, but in truth, he wouldn't weigh the consequences first. In the South, there was a code older than contracts, and Johnny Cash had never forgotten it. By 1969, exhaustion had its own gravity. The party wasn't public. That was the point. No photographers, no stage lights, no need to perform gratitude or charm. Just a long table, bottles already half empty, voices loosened by relief rather than celebration. People leaned back in their chairs the way they only did when they believed nothing they said would matter tomorrow. This was where masks came off, not dramatically, but lazily. Laughter moved through the room in uneven waves. Someone told a story about a missed cue on the show. Someone else complained about contracts. The mood wasn't hostile, it was indulgent. The kind of environment where people mistook comfort for safety. Elvis sat slightly apart, not isolated, just quiet. He listened more than he spoke. That, too, had become familiar. Those who didn't know him well assumed he was tired or distracted. Those who did understood that silence was often a choice. Then it came. Not announced. Not emphasized. Just slipped into conversation like a detail that didn't deserve attention. A remark about Elvis being a poor Southern boy who'd been lucky enough to find polish. A chuckle followed. Not cruel. Almost fond. As if it were a shared truth everyone could agree on without consequences. The laughter wasn't loud. That made it worse. Elvis didn't respond. No smile, no tightening of the jaw. Only a small adjustment. The way he shifted his shoulders back, straightened slightly in his chair. a movement so minimal it could have meant nothing at all. Johnny Cash saw it. He'd been watching Elvis for years, long enough to recognize that moment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was containment. The kind practiced by men who had learned early that reactions could be used against them. The conversation rolled on, oblivious. Someone reached for another drink. Someone repeated the joke, softer this time, as if confirming it had landed. Cash didn't look at the speaker immediately. He looked at the room, at the ease with which the line had been crossed, at how quickly people relaxed when they believed decency was optional. He stood up, not abruptly. No chair scraping the floor. Just the deliberate movement of a man who had already decided something before his body caught up. The room didn't fall silent because of who he was. It fell silent because everyone sensed the tone had shifted, and no one yet knew how badly. Cash drew a breath, slow, controlled, and began to speak. "If you think dirt in a man's voice is something to laugh at," he said, his words steady, unfinished, hanging in the air like the first crack before a storm. The sentence didn't rise in volume. It didn't sharpen. It simply continued, carried by the same calm that had silenced the room in the first place. "If you think dirt in a voice is shame," Johnny Cash said, "then you've never had to sing to survive." No one interrupted him, not because they were afraid of him, but because the words landed without invitation. They weren't aimed like a weapon. They were placed, carefully, where everyone could see them. Cash didn't look at Elvis. He didn't need to. This wasn't a defense offered on someone else's behalf. It was a line being drawn for himself. He spoke about people who learned to sing before they learned to explain themselves. About kitchens where radios mattered more than furniture. About voices shaped by work, by hunger, by nights that didn't allow room for refinement. His tone stayed even, almost tired, as if he were stating something obvious and long overdue. The man who had made the joke tried to rescue the moment. He smiled, raised his hands slightly, and laughed. "Come on," he said. "You know how it works. Image sells. That's just the business." The word business shifted the air. Cash nodded once, slowly. Not in agreement, in acknowledgement. "That's the difference," he replied. "Some of us brought something in. Others just figured out how to package it." The smile across the table faded. Chairs creaked as people adjusted their posture, suddenly unsure which side of the conversation they occupied. For the first time that evening, Elvis lifted his gaze. He didn't speak. He didn't lean forward. He simply looked, directly, steadily, at the man who had laughed first. There was no challenge in it, no heat, only disappointment, clean and unmistakable. It was worse than anger. The room absorbed it all at once. Conversations that had seemed harmless minutes earlier now felt exposed, thin, irresponsible. No one rushed to defend the joke. No one added another comment. Silence settled, not dramatic, but final. Cash sat back down without ceremony. The point had already been made. Dragging it further would have cheapened it. Elvis remained quiet, but something had shifted. Not in his posture, in how others perceived it. His silence no longer looked passive. It looked intentional, controlled, chosen. The party resumed, eventually. Voices returned, careful now. Laughter found safer subjects. But whatever ease had existed before was gone. Some moments don't explode. They harden. And once they do, nothing in the room fits the same way again. The night itself never made the papers. That was the first thing everyone noticed. No headlines, no quotes, no anonymous sources rushing to describe what had happened. Officially, nothing had occurred at all. Unofficially, the temperature shifted. Phone calls stopped being returned as quickly. Meetings that had felt certain were suddenly described as under review. Names were left off guest lists without explanation. No one said why. They didn't have to. In the industry, silence often carried clearer meaning than confrontation. Rumors traveled the way they always did, sideways. One person told another that Cash had been difficult. Someone else said he'd made things uncomfortable. The details changed depending on who was listening, but the conclusion remained the same. Lines had been crossed, and not everyone appreciated being reminded where they were. Cash heard it directly before long. A familiar voice, careful and friendly, warned him not to confuse principle with leverage. "This isn't 55 anymore," he was told. "People don't have to put up with friction." The message wasn't threatening. It was practical. The kind of advice that pretended to be concern. Elvis heard a different version. A producer he trusted mentioned, casually, that a television project involving Cash was being reconsidered. Nothing was decided yet. Just conversations. Just timing. Elvis recognized the phrasing immediately. The way punishment was framed as logistics. For the first time, discomfort settled somewhere deeper than irritation. He hadn't asked Cash to speak. In fact, he'd asked him not to. The thought that someone else might pay a price for a restraint Elvis had chosen sat poorly with him. It followed him longer than he expected. Days later, he picked up the phone himself. There was no preamble, no attempt at humor. "You didn't have to do that for me," Elvis said. The line stayed quiet for a moment before Cash answered. "I didn't do it for you." The words weren't sharp. They weren't defensive. They were simple and final. Elvis leaned back, understanding settling in slowly. This hadn't been loyalty in the usual sense. It hadn't been a favor that could be repaid or declined. Cash hadn't acted because Elvis was famous, or because the moment was dramatic. He'd acted because not responding would have felt like agreement. After they hung up, Elvis sat alone longer than necessary. The industry had always been something to navigate, something to endure. This was different. This was a reminder that choices echoed outward, even the quiet ones. Somewhere between contracts and conscience, a line had been crossed, and neither of them would step back over it. By early 1970, everyone around Elvis agreed on one thing. This was not the moment to complicate anything. The comeback had momentum. The numbers were right. The bookings were strong. His team spoke in careful sequences. Stay focused, keep it clean, don't reopen old tensions. They didn't mention the incident by name. They didn't need to. It existed now as an unspoken variable, something best managed by avoidance. Elvis listened without arguing. He always did. Rehearsals stretched late into the evening. Musicians waited for instructions that didn't come right away. Set lists were printed, revised, approved. Everything looked orderly on paper. Too orderly. Elvis studied the pages longer than usual, not searching for hits, but for something else. A thread that felt honest. Johnny Cash didn't call. He didn't ask for anything. That silence mattered. The night before the performance, Elvis asked for the set list again. Alone. No assistance, no commentary. He made one change, then another. Small adjustments, barely noticeable unless you knew the weight behind them. No explanation followed. On stage, nothing appeared confrontational. No speeches, no raised voice. The audience didn't sense defiance, only control. Elvis moved through the early numbers with precision, keeping the room exactly where he wanted it. Then he reached the song. It wasn't a crowd favorite. It carried no nostalgia hook. Its roots sat deep in Southern ground, in borrowed chords, in stories older than radio. Elvis didn't perform it as a statement. He sang it evenly, without ornament, as if refusing to dress it up for approval. Before the first note, he spoke once. "I'm proud of where I learned to sing," he said. No elaboration, no target, no explanation. The sentence hung there, unprotected by context. Some in the audience applauded out of habit. Others didn't move at all. Those who understood felt it immediately. Those who didn't sensed something had passed by them without permission. Backstage, a few faces tightened. Managers exchanged looks. This wasn't what they'd prepared for, not because it was risky, but because it couldn't be softened afterward. Elvis finished the set as planned. He thanked the musicians. He left the stage without ceremony. Later, alone again, he felt no triumph. Only clarity. He hadn't defended himself. He hadn't corrected anyone. He'd simply placed his origin where it belonged, visible, unembellished, and untouched by apology. Some choices don't demand attention. They wait, confident they'll be heard by the right people. By the early 70s, the incident had lost its edges. Not because it had been resolved, but because the industry had decided it was inconvenient to remember. No articles revisited it. No interviews asked the wrong questions. Time did what it always did in show business. It moved forward, dragging new names into the light and pushing unresolved moments into storage. Charts mattered. Schedules mattered. Silence was efficient. The artist who had laughed that night continued working, at first. Appearances were still polite, smiles still exchanged, but invitations began thinning out in ways no one could trace back to a single cause. Not cancelled, simply not extended, not criticized, just quietly overlooked. People didn't mention Elvis. They didn't mention cash. They mentioned fit, tone, reliability. A vague sense that something about him unsettled rooms he entered. Johnny Cash noticed, but didn't comment. He was offered a return to a major television format not long after. The call came with warmth and conditions disguised as guidance. The producers spoke carefully, praising his authenticity while outlining boundaries. Less opinions, more songs. The phrase was delivered kindly, as if restraint were a favor being offered to him. Cash listened, asked a few questions, took notes. Then he pushed back. Once. Not loudly. Not publicly. He declined a clause that restricted who could sit across from him on stage. It wasn't framed as defiance. He didn't argue philosophy. He simply said the show wouldn't work for him otherwise. The compromise unsettled them more than refusal would have. Elvis watched all of this from a distance. His career moved faster, louder, protected by scale. Yet something about Cash's position stayed with him. The way consequences arrived without ceremony, the way principles demanded patience rather than applause. They didn't speak often. They didn't need to. The industry adjusted. It always did. The moment was filed away under-resolved, though nothing had been addressed. That was the arrangement everyone seemed willing to accept. But memory doesn't obey contracts. Cash began assembling his guest lists personally. No press announcements, no advance framing, names written down without commentary. When asked about direction, he shrugged it off. Just music. Behind the scenes, producers felt a quiet tension they couldn't quite define. Nothing was wrong. Everything was simply deliberate. Somewhere in that deliberation, the shape of the ending began to form. Not as retaliation, not as closure, but as something cleaner. A gesture that wouldn't argue. A moment that wouldn't explain. Just a reminder, placed where forgetting would no longer be possible. The guest list was circulated late and without ceremony. No press release. No hints dropped to columnists. Just a typed page passed between hands that understood how fragile calm could be. Producers scanned the names twice, Then a third time. Everything looked safe, familiar, predictable enough to protect ratings. Relief settled in. Briefly. One name was missing, and that absence felt intentional. Johnny Cash didn't comment. When asked about the direction of the episode, he answered with the same line he'd been using for months. Just a regular show. His tone gave nothing away. That, more than anything, unsettled them. 24 hours before taping, Cash made a call himself. Elvis recognized the voice immediately. There was no greeting heavy with nostalgia, no recap of old moments. Cash spoke plainly, the way he always did when the stakes mattered. "I'd like you to come by," he said. No explanation followed. No reassurance about how it would look. No promise of control. Elvis didn't answer right away. He stood near a window, phone pressed to his ear, watching traffic move without urgency below. The invitation wasn't surprising. What surprised him was how long it had taken, and how little it asked of him. "All right," he said finally. Only then did he add one condition. "Don't introduce me like they usually do," Elvis said. "No titles, no history lesson, just my name." Cash didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He agreed immediately. After the call ended, Elvis remained where he was. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't flattered. What he felt was something closer to responsibility. Not to an audience, but to the moment itself. At the studio, word spread quietly. A few crew members heard rumors and dismissed them. Others sensed movement they couldn't trace. The atmosphere sharpened without visible cause. No one rehearsed anything involving Elvis. No run-throughs. No adjustments made for his presence. The uncertainty was deliberate. On the day of taping, Cash arrived early. He walked the stage alone, checking nothing, changing nothing. When a producer asked if there were any surprises planned, he shook his head. "No," he said, "just music." Sometimes the most unsettling moments are built not from secrecy, but from restraint, from what is left unsaid long enough to carry weight on its own. By the time Elvis stepped into the building, unseen by the audience, the shape of what was about to happen had already settled. No announcement could have prepared them, and none was coming. The studio lights came up without drama. No swell of music. No manufactured anticipation. The audience settled into their seats with the easy confidence of people expecting something familiar. Johnny Cash walked on first. The applause was polite, steady, professional. He acknowledged it with a nod, nothing more. His eyes moved briefly toward the side of the stage, then back to the cameras. "And now," he said evenly, "Elvis Presley." No build-up. No titles. No reminder of who he was supposed to be. Elvis stepped into the light without hurry. No stage costume, no practiced gestures. He looked smaller than the legend people carried with them. Not diminished, just human. The room reacted late, applause rising in uneven layers before falling away again, uncertain how much reverence was expected. Elvis didn't acknowledge it. He moved to the microphone and waited. The musicians followed his lead, careful, restrained. The song they chose wasn't a hit. It didn't ask for recognition. Its melody carried the shape of old porches, borrowed guitars, voices passed down rather than recorded. Southern, unmistakably, but unperformed. Elvis sang one verse, no embellishment, no attempt to reclaim anything. His voice wasn't polished for broadcast. It carried grain, weight, the sound of someone who had learned early how to hold a note when nothing else was certain. Then he stopped. Not on a cue. Not for effect. He simply stepped back and placed the microphone in Johnny Cash's hand. The movement confused the room. Musicians froze, unsure whether to continue. Cameras kept rolling, trained to capture continuation, not pause. Cash didn't sing. He looked at Elvis for a moment, not with gratitude, not with triumph, but with recognition. Then he turned back to the microphone. "That's where it comes from," he said. Nothing followed. No applause rushed in to rescue the silence. No one clapped out of obligation. The stillness stretched past comfort, past protocol, into something television wasn't designed to hold. In that quiet, no one explained Southern accents. No one defended roots. No one argued dignity. The cameras kept recording, but the moment had already stepped beyond them. Eventually, the show moved on. It had to. But something had been left behind. Not a statement, not a victory, but a reminder that some truths don't need volume, that origins don't require permission, and that the strongest answers are sometimes the ones that refuse to argue at all. The silence lingered long after the lights went down.